Let's start this review at the end, and that is to say that the M1 MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, iMac that were released, in the last 12 months, that's the machine for everyone. More than ever before, these new MacBook Pros, 14 and 16 inch, are geared for professionals, actual working, day in, day out professionals. And what I mean by that is, well, when you see these reviews where they do render times and frame rates, that's just scratching the surface. That's scratching the surface of the surface. This thing here, this is like moving from a 1-bedroom apartment to a 3-story detached with a swimming pool and a 5-car garage. There is so much headroom for you to do professional work. That's what you're investing in. I've owned some version of a MacBook Pro since 2012, and every 4 years would upgrade on my own volition, and in between I'd get a corporate upgrade depending on where I was working at the time. And not since 2012 have I felt this much of an upgrade has been brought to laptop computing. There's a lot of hyperbole and excitement around these machines, and sometimes that can be disingenuous, right? Like, how great are these things? For my workflow, for what I do day in and day out, which is mostly photography, still a lot of video production, writing, and a whole bunch of crap in between, this has been the biggest leap when it comes to computing to my workflow that I've ever had, that I've ever experienced, especially on the road, especially when I'm in studio and away from my office. I struggled. I really fucking struggled to get the fans to kick up on this machine. It seems like if you're doing any virtualization or working in Windows and doing something else, that might get it to get going. However, if you're doing editing in Final Cut, DaVinci Resolve, Photoshop, Capture One, whatever your editing platform or choice is, you're really not going to hear the fans at all. You see, if you look at just render times and frame rates, it would seem like the gap between an M1 machine and an M1 Pro or an M1 Max, that there isn't much differentiation there. That's kind of a lie, because yes, while certain tasks can be rather close, you have to look at the entire picture. When you are taking 100 clips from an SD card and dragging it into Final Cut to start editing videos, those things, they're much faster and it doesn't hang as much. When you are looking to open up multiple 2 to 3 gigabyte Photoshop files with layers of adjustments and retouching going on, there's less hang time there. There's less dropping of frame rates when you're moving between these actions. It means that you don't have to quit every application if you're going to start editing a video. It means that you don't have to make sure you're plugged in for hours on end, because you know that some of your running applications are going to suck the juice entirely out of your machine when you're on the go. It means that if you're going to be editing video, you may not necessarily have to create proxy files for everything. And that's incredibly valuable when you're working with these H.265 codecs from someone like Fujifilm, where they can be a bit processor intensive. If the examples that I'm using begin to describe your work or some version of it, and you're looking at these machines on whether you should add it to your workflow, well, it might be the best thing you bring to your workflow. It might be a bargain depending on what you do. Now, if this is more of a hobby to you, if this is something that you're not really relying on, then you might be okay with an M1 machine, or it, you might be okay with the machine you have right now. With all that said, what I'm trying to get to is that there is a definite, visible, tangible difference between a machine running M1 Pro, M1 Max to the existing M1 chips that were ushered in over the last 12 months. Now, my machine here, again, we maxed out the RAM, we got the M1 Max on it because I just wanted the biggest ceiling I could get in a laptop form. We also have a base model 14-inch in studio, which is impressive in its own right. These models, if you're looking at what the 15-inch in 2012 base model came in at, $2,200, and you look at the 16-inch base model, at what it comes at, $2,500, you're looking at a $300 price increase roughly over the last decade, which is, it could be a significant amount for some people watching, or it could be expected when you're looking at a decade removed. Let's just take ourselves away from that price increase and just look at this overall. If you are making money for delivering creative projects, That is to say that every time you publish something, that's when you're being paid. This might pay for itself. This might be a bargain depending on the amount of work you do in that capacity. If that doesn't describe your work, if you're compensated for your time, if creative work is more of a hobby, if it doesn't really take into account even 30% of your annual income, then you should probably hold off. You should probably keep the machine you have or look for a used M1 machine and you'll still get a noticeable upgrade. I use the M1 MacBook Air for a year now and I've sold that for this, but even that was incredibly impressive like I talked about in my review. But again, you gotta come back to your lifestyle. You gotta come back to looking at what your day-to-day looks like. If you're not being compensated to ship projects, to turn content over, and it's not measured in that capacity, then you may as well skip the hype for as long as you can, save your money and invest it maybe somewhere else in your production workflow.
But God might be on vacation, and the promised land ain't never promised. My baby telling me to be patient, but the devil always working overnight, my darling.
It wasn't even 6 months ago that I was swooning publicly about how amazing the new M1 MacBook Air is, the value that it brought my workflow, and how I may not have to upgrade anytime soon. Even though a new set of MacBook Pros were on the horizon and rumors were floating around, I couldn't help but think of how much more beneficial could this be to a professional creator workflow? The answer is a fucking lot. I'm not sure if my configuration caused the delay, but I opted for the M1 Max chip with 64 gigs of RAM and a 2 terabyte storage solution. And well, we have to start this deep dive on that chip. The M1 Max is John Wick, a ruthlessly efficient executioner that continues to power through obstacles regardless of what you throw at it. The M1 was a massive leap forward in computing technology, and this takes the baton and excels even further. Generating previews for hundreds to thousands of 102 megapixel RAW files happen noticeably faster, and when I scroll through them to begin editing, it doesn't flinch. Now, this was all happening in Capture One Pro, which is far more optimized for image processing, but what about Adobe? The M1 MacBook Air never stopped me from opening a 2 gigabyte PSD file, but the M1 Max chip does a clean and jerk on these files like a Turkish weightlifter. It happens in a manner that's smoother and without hesitation. Now, on top of all the photography work I do, I'm regularly editing videos for clients and this YouTube channel, and well, this is where this laptop starts to pay for itself. The ability to readily chew through 4K 10-bit 422 H.265 footage, even the beefy ones that Fujifilm churns out, saves me much time in creating proxies and overall allows me to work faster. In the event I need to create proxy files, it happens much faster, meaning that, you guessed it, I can get back to work faster. What about exporting high-resolution files that you want to send to someone to color grade? You guessed it, kids, faster. One of the choke points for my MacBook Air was color grading in DaVinci Resolve, where it could drop frames during playback, and here, it's not even close. I can rip through 4K footage with over a dozen nodes of edits, and playback is as smooth as you need it to be. You see, it's not that the MacBook Air flopped at the previous task, it's quite the opposite. It managed to do all of them despite the timid size and price. This new MacBook Pro just is a much awaited sequel that managed to exceed the original in nearly every way possible, like Terminator 2. Also, a year removed from the MacBook Air release means that you can now have a Pro machine with a wide gamut of software that's ready to take advantage of this CPU and GPU. And well, I still think most applications have room to grow and become even more efficient in the months to come. It's still impressive to see how far it is in less than 12 months. Now, you could argue that this chip alone would have been enough of an upgrade for professionals to pull the trigger, but this is just where the conversation starts. The new 16.2-inch Liquid Retina XDR display is a fucking joy to look at. The bezels are there, but just recede further into the machine. At 3456 by 2234, the display isn't technically 4K, but 7.7 million dots sure helps you forget. As you'd expect, the brightness and quality of these displays are gorgeous and make photo editing even more enjoyable than before, to the point that I don't want to use my monitor. Now, compound the quality of this display with Apple's inclusion of ProMotion that allows for up to 120 Hz refresh rate, and well, shit, it's simply the best damn display on a MacBook yet. While critics may scoff at these specs and point to competitors that have done things like this before, no one is doing it at the integration, quality, and scale of Apple. Sorry. Now, the notch might bother some people and make for some cute internet memes, but the truth is, just like when it happened on the iPhone X, you forget about it when you start working. The menu bar stretching into the top of the display means you have few more pixels in that valuable vertical space. Within the notch is an upgraded 1080p webcam with improved image processing for your next Zoom call. I have some thoughts here, but I'll save it for later. The speakers of this thing have also been improved where supported media can give you a feeling of spatial audio. It's not that it just sounds louder, but the fidelity seems to be a bit higher where you can pick out layers of your music. You have to hear it to understand. As with the MacBook Air, the Magic Keyboard here has a good travel to it and feels great to just pummel as I type thousands of words during a crunch. And let's pour one out for the touch bar because it's finally gone. Honestly, I wonder if this was all the upgrades that this machine got, I think the same amount of people would upgrade. Look, in my experience, it only gets juicier from here because the WWE style reversal off the top turnbuckle that Apple pulled to bring back HDMI and an SD card reader and even MagSafe, perfection. Now, it isn't a UHS 3 card SD reader that, people would have liked, but it's still plenty fast enough for offloading footage. These things do what you expect, and the inclusion of 3 Thunderbolt ports means that you might be able to throw away those forsaken dongles. Look, they weren't massive headaches, but it's not like they were an invited guest. All of this sits in a chassis that's a bit wider and heavier than its predecessor, and in a manner that moderately engages the new thermal system. Nowhere near the jet engine that kicks into gear when my wife's Lenovo from work turns on. What makes everything I talk about even more valuable is that you can do all your work even longer. Apple promises up to 21 hours of video playback or 14 hours of browsing the web, and this might be a little disingenuous, but I think it's relatively close. After days of rough measurements across various tasks and applications, I found that I could get about 8 to 9 hours of heavy-duty work done, which in all honesty is fucking massive. For example, if I were invited to an event in Paris and I need to capture photo and video for this, I could dump the footage on this machine, edit the material the entire way home, and still have plenty of juice left to upload the content and share the links before reaching my doorstep. This is not a reality for most people watching, but it's a scenario that you can contort to different applications and simply appreciate the value of. Now, that's a lot of praise for this machine, but at $4,300 for this configuration, there has to be some drawbacks, right? One of the big glaring issues for this machine is that it's still not a destination for gamers, which, if you've heard me talk about, is a damn shame. While many would love to see how this architecture could handle the latest AAA titles, I'm reluctant to ever believe that that will become a reality. The MacBook Pro is a place where creators can get shit done unless video games are part of your creative process. Sure, there's a library of Steam and Apple Arcade titles, but I want to know what this chip would do with something like Battlefield or Halo. That being said, I'm not holding my breath. Now, you won't hear me complain about the notch because I think it's a non-issue that some of these pearl-clutching meme chasers are exaggerating on, but the webcam, well, I'm not as impressed. Yes, the quality has improved from the MacBook Air where it doesn't look as muddy, but not moving to a crispy 4K solution just seems like a missed opportunity on a machine this pricey. To take this one step further, the omission of Face ID is also a bit of salt in the wound. While you can flip the lid and unlock with your Apple Watch, it would have been nice to have Face ID as an unlock option as well. Moving to the display, the upgrade to mini LED is largely great. There's just a minor issue of blooming that may happen when you have an all-black background and bright white text because of the local dimming zones. And again, because of the mini LED that they're using or the OLED technology that Apple isn't using, you have these rare occasions where parts of a video you're watching have this weird blooming to them. People with the latest iPad Pros had a similar issue, and for me, quite simply, it sucks at times and can take me out of the experience, but for some of you watching, it may not be as much of an issue. That being said, it doesn't happen often enough for me to trade this display for what the older MacBook Pros ship with. Now, this may not be an issue for some of you, but I firmly believe that the headphone jack is on the wrong side of this machine. It should be on the right alongside other media-related ports like HDMI and SD card reader. If I am to dock my laptop with a power port towards the power source away from me, I would like to have the headphone jack pointed toward me. Or, if I want Thunderbolt HDMI pointed toward power and media sources, I would also want the audio jack pointed in that direction. When I look at a machine like this, the only possible competition in my eyes are coming from Microsoft or Razer. The latter being something that, while lacking polish, a tempting offer with the included graphics and displays. However, the brutal truth is that there's no real competitor other than Apple's own offerings. Mobile and cloud technology has changed how people interact with files and file systems. As a result, you have individuals shifting to platforms that better suit their mental map of how computing works. I mean, look at any teenager or kid using a computer now. This means that the Windows, Mac, Google argument is less about specs and more about function. For some, it may be a Chromebook, for others, a custom-built PC, and even an iPad for a specific group. Trying to honestly compare the new MacBook Pros to top-of-the-line PC counterparts is, well, bullshit. It's a lie, and one that is disrespectful to most consumers. Understanding if this machine is right for you really comes down to how you work. And to take that further, how much work you do. Not since 2012 has the MacBook Pro felt so close to perfection. That year and every 5 years since, I would upgrade my Pro machine for the work I do and push that laptop around the world to deliver in the most demanding environments. Last year, however, the M1 MacBook Air was an exception. In the best case scenario, that would be the new direction my work was going in, and at worst, well, it would just be a 1-year rental where I would sell this thing and get the new one. In a video earlier this year, I argued that the MacBook Air is the best laptop for most people, and I still stand by that statement. I've been pushing mine for nearly a year with photo editing, 4K video production, and hours of writing on a weekly basis. And like I said before, it just doesn't quit. If I had to make a blanket statement for the new MacBook Pros, well, these are the best laptops for most full-time creators. With 2 screen options and a suite of customizations to the internals, the working artist that is constantly exporting photos, videos, music, illustrations, code, and more, this is the first machine you should look at for your work. Having used this intensely, I think that the conversation starts here, where you apply your day-to-day and then rule out if you hit a roadblock of some kind. The truth is, though, there aren't many roadblocks. You have a powerful machine that's built for the future and provides true value at almost every corner. Regardless of what you create for a living, this machine will bring you real performance gains to your workflow in a tangible way and allow you to get more done more often. Well, unless your work involves Halo. For many professionals, I firmly believe the 14-inch M1 Pro with 16 gigs of RAM and 1 terabyte of storage is plenty. The only reason you change any of these variables would come down to the specific nature and frequency of your work. For me, this is a once-in-a-half-decade investment where I look to get the best I can afford for the work that I do. From tethered shooting, to video productions, to podcasting, to web development, to marketing strategy, and damn near every form of procrastination that the internet has to provide, this M1 Max MacBook Pro is the new ceiling for my lifestyle that buys back time. The 15 to 30 minutes that this thing has been giving me back in time each day means that I can use it less, not more. It means that I can unplug sooner. It means that I can search for a power outlet later. It simply means that I can get back to doing something far more important than being on this machine, creating. And there you have it. That is my honest review of the new 16-inch MacBook Pro. As always, my name is Gadgen. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.